Hello, hello. Welcome back to Peak Northwest, an outdoors and travel podcast by the Oregonian and Oregon Live, dedicated to the adventure and exploration of our beautiful Pacific Northwest. I'm Jamie Hale.
And I'm Vicki Connor. Together, we take you to some of the most beautiful and interesting destinations in our region, discussing where to go, what to do, and places to see. And today, we're diving back into the past, looking at Oregon's almost national parks.
That's right, Vicki. There are obviously a ton of beautiful places in Oregon, as any listener to the podcast surely knows by now. But our state has only one full-fledged national park at Crater Lake. We should note that Oregon is also home to some national monuments and some national historical parks that are run by the National Park Service and are like national park sites. But those just don't have the same cachet as like that national park designation.
Yep, exactly. And I think a lot of people who are not from Oregon or are not frequent visitors to the state might be surprised to hear this because when they think Oregon, they're like, oh, beautiful outdoors and nature. But we only have one national park, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, Washington has what, like three, right? Olympic, Rainier, North Cascades. California obviously has a ton. And I feel like, we do have, again, these national park sites, but people, who have their little like scratch off national park, books, they're touring the country in their RV. They're not scratching off like, Oregon Caves National Monument and Preserve. That's not on there. That's not part of the scratch off. So there's something about being a national park, capital N, capital P, that really has this draw to it. So it is surprising, Vicki. Yeah. But I think what was surprising to me when I started doing some research on this a few years ago was how many places almost became national parks, but ultimately did not.
Yeah. And so we have a few to go through today, but maybe let's explain what we mean by almost national parks. Like what happened?
Yeah, various things, different reasons. But what we're talking about are places that were at some point considered to some degree designation for that national park status. That doesn't mean it got close necessarily, but it means at least that people were saying this should be a national park, people at high levels, right? So there were bills introduced, or the National Park Service came and visited, or, plans were drawn, or whatever. Whatever the case may be. Obviously, none of them panned out. But we have four places where this discussion happened. And so we have these four tantalizing alternate realities in which Oregon has all these national parks.
And it makes you think like what would these places look like today if they did have that designation? How would things be different, etc. So yeah, where should we kind of start?
Well, I want to start with this trio that I did some research on back in 2016. Oh my God. These are three parks that all kind of around the year 1940 were being considered for National Park Service. This was a time when, they were looking at lots of national parks. This Park Service had, been around for, a decade or so at this point, or a few decades at this point. And national parks had started to become popular. So I think people were just sort of looking at like a lot of different places. So the first one that I was looking at on this list here is Hell's Canyon. Vicki, you've not been up to Hell's Canyon, is that right?
I have not.
I've only been once, years ago, only the one time. I think we talked about it last time. We were talking about how hard it is to get up there,
Yeah.
like just how long. You have to drive all the way to Joseph, and then it's like another multiple hours on like long washboard gravel roads to get up to like these viewpoints over Hell's Canyon, and it's a haul. You really have to be dedicated to it.
When we went to Joseph together to record one of our Peak Northwest videos, it was kind of in the talks as a potential, like, oh, maybe we'll go to Hell's Canyon, but it just it was just going to take up way too much time, and so we didn't end up going.
It's a whole extra day on your trip, basically.
And a lot of driving, yeah.
Yes, exactly. But that said, Hell's Canyon is officially the deepest river gorge in North America. It is deeper than the Grand Canyon. It's huge. It's enormous. Um, so this is along the Snake River on the northeast border of Oregon and Idaho. This huge, rugged, big canyon. It had been managed by the U.S. Forest Service from the start, from not from the start, but from when the government was out here managing lands. And there was a proposal floated around 1940 to make Hell's Canyon a national park, but locals were not really thrilled about switching designations and switching management over to the National Park Service. As the Oregonian reported in 1940, and I love this quote, they said, "The proposal to make Hell's Canyon a national park runs head on like a locomotive collision into the economics of Wallowa County." So each year, they said, the Forest Service had put into the county treasury an average of $10,636, so specific, as its share from the grazing and timber fees. The national park would neither pay those taxes nor those fees. Of course, this is a time when national park tourism was not as it is today, and perhaps they didn't consider the economic impact of having tourism up there. So as a result, Hell's Canyon, the proposal to turn this into a national park, just kind of fizzled out. It it just did People weren't into it. It sort of mirrored a lot of the issues and the controversies that happen in more recent years about what is the point of public lands? Do you set aside the land for scenic enjoyment or for environmental preservation, or or is it worth like locking up the commercial value of timber or mining or what have you?
That's super interesting. I mean, I'm also curious how would it be different today if it was, a national park?
Right, would the roads be better? I imagine probably so. This is such a rugged area, it's hard to do that. I should say that Hell's Canyon, in 1975, did become a national scenic area, which is a designation that came with, a new conservation status, but it did continue to be managed by the U.S. Forest Service. So, it's not a national park, but it did get some kind of protection, some sort of different designation later on. So this is an area that is protected, but again, it's without being this sort of like this big national park. It's not. There's no infrastructure there. There's no gift shop up at Hat Point. You just have some really pretty views and some long gravel roads and maybe a couple of campsites, and that's about it.
I imagine this would be one of the least visited national parks, not because of its lack of beauty, but because it's so far out there and remote and such a trek to get out to that, you have to be really committed to go out there.
Well, like North Cascades in
Yeah,
Washington, right?
exactly.
So far out there, the season to go there is pretty short.
Mhm.
Um, I think I don't think you would have that many people. So maybe they were right in saying it's not going to generate very much money. That said, that timber fees and that industry is that eventually waned, and it got its conservation status in the end anyway. But I think this is one. So let's play a game with these, Vicky.
Okay.
Um, National park or nah? You know, do you think this should be like reconsidered for a national park? Do you think this would be make a great national park? Or are you like, nah, this isn't it?
This one's tough because I haven't been there,
Sure.
but because I haven't been there, I'll just say no because it's
Yeah.
pretty hard to get out to and everything. But part of me also wants to say yes to every single one we're going to talk about because I think Oregon deserves more love.
Of course, we're biased. We love Oregon, but I'm going to go with you here in this. I'm going to say nah. National park status does not need to be at Hell's Canyon. I think this is fine as it is. It's rugged. It's hard to get to as it is. Leave it that way. There's something about that mystique that I think really works for it anyway.
Yeah. Let some parts of Oregon just be wild.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got Hell's Canyon. What's next?
Okay. All right. The second one we have is Mount Hood. Of course. It makes so much sense. Again, in 1940, it was considered likely for national park status. Because obviously you have like Mount Rainier. You have, Olympic National Park, all the Olympic mountains. Centering a national park around Pacific Northwest peaks makes sense. We do it North Cascades also. So Mount Hood being the tallest mountain in Oregon, that makes a lot of sense to me. But this national park status in 1940 was relying on like this pretty major governmental shift. So at that time, President Roosevelt was hinting that the U.S. Forest Service might move to the Department of the Interior, where National Park Service is. Um, and with that, the Mount Hood National Forest would sort of naturally become Mount Hood National Park. That was kind of the idea. Um, but that again didn't quite pan out. So, as anyone who's familiar with the bureaucracy of our country knows, the U.S. Forest Service is still not in the Department of Interior. So that just didn't happen. But people really did make an argument for it. So again, the Oregonian at the time reported that Mount Hood would unquestionably be established as a national park if this had gone through, and that Secretary of the Interior said that certain areas in the Pacific Northwest lend themselves to national park status, and that Mount Hood is one of these. So people were into it, but it just again didn't happen.
This is one that I will say I'm kind of glad that it's not a
Mm.
national park. I feel like it's just this gem so close to Portland that I wouldn't want, lines backing up to, I mean, obviously this happens for ski season, but like I
I was
wouldn't
gonna say.
I would not want in the summertime like lines backing up to get into the park, and like I feel like access would be just a little bit more hindered if it was a national park, whereas it's so easily accessed right now that I wouldn't want anything else in the way, even if it meant, trails be a bit nicer. But I feel like trails are okay right now. I don't know. All I'm saying is that I like Mount Hood as it is right now, and I couldn't really imagine it differently.
It's hard to, right? I mean, I think that you probably wouldn't have the same kind of ski areas you have on Mount Hood. I think you certainly could have Timberline Lodge still. That is sort of, I think, would be sort of like you have, like you can see at Mount Rainier, the lodge life. You drive up to the lodge, you've got the trails that go up into it, but it's maybe not that again that big built up ski area. But people climbing the peak, enjoying the trails, all that stuff. I don't think it would look so different. Again, minus the skiing. Um, so I kind of can, I feel like I can just in my mind just overlay a national park over top of what exists now, and it doesn't look so different. Um, but again, maybe like you said, maybe you end up with more crowds, people coming to Mount Hood to check it off the bucket list.
Hmm.
Again, very convenient, super close to Portland. Maybe we might have better, lodging and amenities there. No knock on the current amenities, but like I've been waiting for like, a hot spring resort on Mount Hood for so long. And maybe we'd be able to sit in a soaking pool and look out at the mountain if it was a national park. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. I will say the one big thing for me with national park status is, for the most part, dogs are not allowed. I want to be able to go to Mount
Ah,
Hood and have Stella with me. So
okay.
for that alone,
Okay.
I'm gonna say in our game here, better off not being national
Okay.
park.
National park or nah, you're going nah with Mount Hood.
Purely for selfish reasons.
I get that. I get that. I feel a little bit torn on this.
Hmm.
I think if I'm going for purely selfish reasons, I'm going to go yes with this
Okay.
because I don't ski. I don't have a dog. Those things don't have a personal emotional appeal to me. I feel for y'all, but I think mostly just curious. I think it makes sense there. It makes a lot of sense. And it seems like it should be a national park. Looking at Mount Rainier and seeing what it looks like there, I just feel like it's so easy to imagine it being a Mount Hood. So I'm gonna go with yes. Go back. I'll go back in time and try to convince Congress to make it happen.
All right. Moving along with our list. All right, the Oregon coast.
Okay. Okay. So when Olympic National Park came about and claimed a big chunk of the Washington coastline, it really stirred the imagination of people in Oregon who thought, Oregon coast, that's a perfect place for a national park. Are you kidding? The Oregonian reported, again, a park on the Oregon coast would be unique among all the national parks of the region. They were looking at a park that would encompass 30,000 acres of land in southwest Curry County. stretching 21 miles along the coast from Gold Beach south to Brookings. Now, Vicky, does that remind you of anywhere in particular?
Of course. And this is one that we've also talked about on the podcast before. And it's the Boardman corridor.
That's right. So, if you just imagine the Boardman corridor as a national park, that's what they were talking about at the time. So this is one that in 1940, it seems like of these three had the best chances. Oregon Senator Charles L. McNary had introduced a bill to Congress, had been approved by both Secretary of the Interior Harold Ickes and officials with the National Park Service, and locals were also on board. Everybody was into this. They said, yes, let's make the Oregon Coast National Park happen. The lone sticking point seemed to be the apparently uncontentious issue of buying out a few plots of private land along the coastline, an effort that would cost an estimated $500,000. At the time, Oregon Parks Superintendent Samuel H. Boardman said, quote, for $500,000, the national government can acquire a playground of matchless grandeur. So what happened? Not super clear what happened. Uh, the effort just kind of fizzled out. Of course, when you talk about this and all these efforts in 1940, it's worth noting that the next year, the US entered World War II and all of a sudden started thinking about things other than making national parks. They were doing other stuff. Um, so that's kind of my theory is that it had momentum. They had this sticking point they were trying to work out, and it just didn't happen. Of course, Boardman made it happen for the Oregon State Park Service. And, you ended up with the Boardman corridor, which started purchasing land in 1949. So he says National Park Service isn't going to do it. Hey, why don't we go ahead and do it? And between 49 and 1957, they made like a dozen purchases and created this scenic corridor.
This one right here has my vote for a
Yeah.
national park. Like, it just seems silly that it's not. One, I think without a doubt, it is so incredibly beautiful. One of these times in my life that I've been the most awestruck by seeing the coast and the ruggedness of it all. Um, but two, it was super crowded when I went, and I think like a little bit more crowd control and then monetizing it, I think makes sense as well. It just screams national park to me.
I'm agreeing with you on this one, Vicky. I think this is a spot, like you said, there's so many people who go there and it's such a mess sometimes. Like we talked about Secret Beach here before. Parking for Secret Beach is silly. It's silly how bad it is. Like it's just like a plot of dirt on one side of a guardrail. That needs a parking lot. The state parks department isn't going to invest, billions and billions of dollars into this or whatever it's cost. I don't know. But, getting that bigger federal government money, you might be able to do something there. I think it could be really cool. This is the plan. Well, it fizzled out in the 40s. People brought it back up a couple times over the years since. So in 1960, the Oregonian did a poll and found majority support for a national park still among residents on the coast. And in 1986, Curry County commissioners resurrected the idea as a way to help the local economy, which had recently been ravaged by mill closures and some cycles of harsh weather. But again, it didn't come together, didn't come to fruition. My question here is, could it still? Is it too late or can we make this happen?
That's what I'm curious about. Like what is the process of, rebidding for this to be a national park?
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. If anyone is listening who has this kind of power or knowledge, let us know if this is a possibility. I do feel like the National Park Service is sort of chronically underfunded, and maybe it's not a
Yeah.
good time to make a new one. At the same time, boy, how cool would that be?
Yeah. Right?
It just again, like it just makes sense here.
Do you know what the newest national park is? I want to say it was like somewhere in West Virginia. Is that right?
Yeah, a quick Google shows New River Gorge National Park and Preserve in West Virginia. Great memory. December 27, 2020. That is most recent. There were two established in 2019, one in Indiana, one in New Mexico. and then 2018, 2013. So it doesn't happen all the time, but it does certainly happen. I wonder if some of these are places that the National Park Service already manage, that they just like change the designation on, upgrade it from a national monument to a national park, for example. I bet it would be much more complicated to try to transfer the property from like state hands to federal hands and then give it a whole new designation. I think that would be a whole, boy, just such a whole thing.
Yeah, I can imagine. There's a lot of bureaucracy to jump through.
Yeah. So, not holding my breath for national park status in the Boardman Quarter anytime soon, but we can dream.
We
We're
can.
we're we're here on Peak Northwest. We can dream.
So we have one more kind of bonus place in Oregon that maybe once was up for national park designation, and that is Silver Falls.
Yeah, this is one that I missed in my original story in 2016, and Zach Ernest of the Statesman Journal found did a great story on this in 2017 actually about this, and really fascinating. So Silver Falls State Park, obviously one of the most beautiful places in Oregon. The gem of the state park system, et cetera, et cetera. Its reputation precedes it. In September of 1926, the superintendent of Crater Lake National Park, Goff Thompson, great name, Goff.
Gosh.
Um, he, according to Zach Ernest here, toured all 10 waterfalls and was there to essentially decide whether it merited inclusion in, at the time, was a really burgeoning national park system. The idea was to preserve the canyon from logging, which had dominated the area since the late 19th century and into the 20th century. That effort to protect it was kickstarted by a local photographer, June Drake, and was taken up by Senator McNary, who requested the area to be considered for a national park in 1926. So Thompson comes out, he takes a look at it. He says, wow, this place is gorgeous. The waterfalls are lovely. It was summertime, really dry, but they were still like flowing. It's incredible. I'm into it. I love this. But there is so much logging here. He said, if the region were still virgin, there is no doubt that their merit would warrant very careful consideration as to national park value. But unfortunately, the region has heard the sound of the axe for many years. Worse, there are large areas of stark stumpage staring one in the face from every angle. From the brink of one of the best falls, one looks across a canyon up a slope that is absolutely bare, except for hundreds or thousands of stumps that, from a distance, look like so many dark headstones. Grim.
Dang.
So goes without saying, it didn't happen. The fact that it had been so ravaged by loggers meant that it wasn't pretty enough. The beauty of the waterfalls did not push it over the edge, so they decided against it, and it became a state park instead.
Super harsh by Goff.
Goff, I know, like, dude. I mean, he's not wrong. Like, that's tough. That's a tough look. But I mean, looking at the park today, that forest has, it's grown very well. It's this beautiful. It's not like an old growth forest, but it's a beautiful, dense forest. I mean, it's one of the most scenic places in the state.
Justice for Silver Falls. I'm really upset with Goff. I just like it makes me want to defend Silver Falls to the death, you know?
I feel you. So, okay, so in our game of national park or not, where are you falling with Silver Falls?
Just to stick it to Goff, I say national park.
I love that answer and I support you 100%. And I'm gonna go ahead and say nah for me, just because it's such a good state park. They're doing
Yeah,
such a great job out there. It doesn't need anything more. They've already got, the good cabins, the great trails. They're building a whole new campground. They're doing just fine in Silver Falls. They don't need the status, but it should have had it back in the day.
yeah.
I think I think it was a little short-sighted to say all these trees are gone. It's not going to be good. Like, give it 100 years and it's going to be great.
Exactly, exactly. If I wasn't sticking it to Goff, I would say the amenities there are great. The cabins, I love that they have what we've talked about before on this podcast, the tree climbing is something you can do there, which is super cool and like a once in a lifetime experience. So, I mean, they've got a lot going on at Silver Falls right now, which is awesome to see.
Yeah, they're doing fine. Hey, Goff tried to come and shoot Silver Falls down, but you know what? It's doing fine. It got a new partner in the state park system who treats it well,
Yes.
and they're happy together. So back
Yes.
off, NPS.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Silver Falls made it out just fine.
So those are our four almost national parks. Before we wrap things up, Vicky, I am curious. As you're sort of thinking about all the places in Oregon, is there anywhere else in the state that you feel like should be considered or should have been considered or like could be a national park?
This is also a place I haven't been to quite yet, but I feel like potentially the Alvord Desert could maybe
Mm.
be a national park. I don't know. I feel like the just seeing the playa, I'm like, "Oh, national park right there."
It's a beautiful playa. Not a lot there. Not a lot. I mean, there's the hot springs.
Mhm.
It is far out there. I'm interested. I respect the take, and I'm interested to know how that would look, how it would affect it.
Yeah. How about you, Jamie?
My first thought is Cascade Siskiyou, which is a national monument. I think just like it's this beautiful, brilliant spot where like the Cascade Mountains meet the Siskiyou Mountains and the Klamath Mountains, and it's like this biodiversity there that's very cool and really great trails and mountains and all this stuff. But there's not a ton of like infrastructure there. There's only like a few trailheads. There's like not a lot of great ways to explore it. I would just love to see more ways to sort of open access to that area while also protecting it. This is where I don't know if like maybe that's good or not, but
Yeah.
that's the first place I thought of.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It is so interesting of like the pros and cons of, this national park status.
Hmm. You want like, I would say you, but I want like that, the pride that comes with being like an Oregon national park, but I also want the places to be protected and not overrun with people. Um, but at the same time, I want more people to come and see them and enjoy them, but responsibly. So it's this real game I'm playing in my head.
Yeah. Gotta strike that good healthy balance of the two.
That's right. Well, folks, I think that will wrap things up for today. But until next time, you can watch our videos on the Oregonians YouTube channel and view all of our travel and outdoors coverage on OregonLive.com/travel, as well as HereIsOregon.com.
Please leave us a rating or review if you enjoy the show. And if you want to support this podcast as well as our local journalism, please consider a subscription to Oregon Live. You can find details at OregonLive.com/pod support. Also, if you're a fan of the show and you're interested in potentially sponsoring it, you can get in touch with our marketing people at advertise@oregonian.com. This episode of the show is produced by me, Vicki Connor, alongside Jamie Hale.
Stay safe and happy travels, everyone. Until next time, we leave you with this 10 seconds of Zen.